welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, if it is evening where you are, at Space Cowboy Books Online. Tonight we have a special treat. We have 4 of the Volume 38 Writers of the Future winners: Lazarus Black, Michael Panter, M. Elizabeth Ticknor, and Grand Prize winner Desond Astaire. We're going to start the program with a brief reading from all of this evening's authors, and then we're going to move into the interview segment of the event. And if the audience has any questions, please feel free to drop those in the chat and we'll try to get to them all. We're going to start off tonight with a brief reading from Lazarus Black. Lazarus Black is an American author of genre fiction, living under the shadow of a Pacific Northwest volcano with 3 goddesses, his wife, and 2 daughters. Psychic Poker is Lazarus's first sale, but hardly his last. It juxtaposes poker, the synthesis of probability and human behavior, with psychic powers, the solution to both probability and the chaos of free will. What if every player is psychic? What if no player has an advantage? What if their lives are at stake? But the strength of the story is in the reluctant main character, Tyson Young, a middle-aged Aussie with an acute wit. Lazarus writes from life. His stories are inspired by the diverse communities he has lived in, plus friends and family across the globe. He specifically attacks stereotypes and reinvents tropes to reflect authentic experiences that are sometimes stranger than fiction. He once earned a free funeral until the mortician learned his name was Lazarus, and a good laugh was had by all. A true lover of learning, Lazarus has traversed North America dozens of times and has been a professional artist, advertiser, creative, software developer, database designer, epigrapher, executive, educator, inventor, game designer, pool hustler, heathen clergyman, machinist apprentice, glass blower, scholar, actor, and many other roles, and now a published author of fiction. He hopes you enjoy Psychic Poker and look forward to reading more from him in the future. I'm going to hand it over to Lazarus to share an excerpt from his story, Psychic Poker.
Hello, thank you very much for that extremely long introduction. There it is. So volume 38, I happen to be the last story, last but not least, in the entire book, page 449. And it starts. Again, I apologize to Michael and any other Aussies in the room. But it is first person point of view from an Australian character, so I'm going to do the best that I can. No one is supposed to know what I do. The envelope lies torn in my lap, teetering on my knee as my belly threatens to push it off like a jealous cat. I sit in my caravan behind my dinner table / desk, enjoying the Moolalaba beach breeze through my window. Australian climate's fine. Blue sky, yellow sand, ugly shirts. It's not a glorious life, but I make the most of it. I'm that kind of legend. Caravanning lets me travel where I like and avoid people I don't like, and mail from people I don't like. I don't like mail. I don't read mail. I barely email. And I almost tossed this one in the bin with the rest, but the addressee was too specific. To Mr. Tyson Young, the best psychic in the world. The letter flutters in one hand as the plane ticket sticks in my other. Questions tick over in my mind, but the most pressing comes out my lips. Who mails anything anymore? The whole setup is a taunt, of course, and the taunter worked hard to hide themselves from searing. People believe all sorts of rubbish, like psychics can learn things about a person by touching something they've owned. This had been computer printed, computer addressed, computer postage, but not trusted to be opened if it had been computer delivered. Fortunately, you don't have to be psychic to be smart. Even without reading, I knew the letter declared one of 3 things. Mr. Anonymous believes too hard in the power of psychics, wants some sort of scientific proof that I am one, or desperately needs one now. It's all bloomin' 3. Dear Mr. Young, it says, please accept this invitation to participate in the first annual Psychic Poker Tournament. There's no fee. You'll be provided with 10 million Chinese yuan to buy your seat at the table. Play until you win everything or lose. 6 seats will be filled by invitation only. I check the exchange rate on my phone and whistle. 60 million yuan converted is 12 million bucks. This is both a challenge and an experiment, it says. There will be no media or fanfare. Your only reward will be all the money you win and the personal satisfaction of defeating 5 other psychics. Please find your airline ticket to Honolulu included. I look forward to learning if the world's best psychic is named Tyson Young. No signature. It is all the hallmarks of a legitimate scam. It promises everything is free, gives me almost no time to think, let alone pack before my flight. And the personal note strokes my ego and it pokes it at the same time. Nice touch. Hell if I'm going, though. I like my anonymity. Not just because of the folks begging me to tell their future, but because of the blokes asking how I've married 3 times. Sometimes we lot like pretending we can't see what's coming and just live it. Hope and pessimism are our yin and yang. Today I'm a pessimist. If some rich guy thinks he can lure me out of hiding so he can prove psychics exist, he's got to be dreaming. My phone is about to ring, so I fold the letter, drain a glass of single malt stout, and pin down one with the other on the table. One lonely breakfast sausage resists rewrapping in plastic and becomes such an ugly mess of folds, creases, and tears I give up and toss it in the bin. My phone rings. Hoy, I say, just to piss her off. Who is this? You know damn well who it is, Kathy snarls, her already tinny voice accentuated by the phone's tiny speaker. Our daughter eloped a week ago. Didn't need to be psychic to know she wanted to blame me for it. I say, hello, Catherine. Don't you hello, Catherine, me? How dare you do that to my daughter? She doesn't know I'm psychic. I told her, of course, you do stupid stuff when you're in love, but she never believed me because, well, you do stupid stuff when you're in love. What did I do this time? You helped her. I did. Of course you did, you wanker. Edie just texted me from Hawaii, said she won some all-expense-paid trip. She denies it, but I know it was you. My neck shivers and spine runs cold. I'm not surprised I didn't see it. I don't know everything, especially if it doesn't involve me, but this sort of does. Bastard knew I wouldn't go for his little game, so he invented a reason. He lured in my daughter for leverage, maybe even kidnapped her. It's a good ruse, I reckon. And he didn't need to be psychic, just smart. Too smart. I let Kathy scream at me for a few more seconds while I think, is Edie in danger? No, at least not if I go. There's no reason to hurt her in advance. And the kidnapping would draw attention to his little experiment. But if I'm the only one who won't go, she and her husband could die in an accident as a warning to others refusing a future invitation. I tell my ex that I'll handle it and hang up. It'd be an odd thing, 6 psychics sitting in one place for a game of poker. What's the worst that could happen? I imagine I should go.
Thank you, Lazarus. That was Lazarus Black with an excerpt from Psychic Poker. Next up, we're going to have Michael Panter and reading an excerpt from their story, Lilt of the Lark. Michael Panter is an English author and journalist with exceedingly high ambitions and a frustratingly low word count per day. A language enthusiast, he speaks fluent Swedish and is well on his way to learning Italian. His writing journey began humbly when, age 7, he penned the sequel to Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. George Lucas went with Attack of the Clones instead. Michael's love for secondary world fantasy, meanwhile, was fostered largely by Tolkien. In 2018, one of his novellas, Deathsworn, won a Waddy Wattpad highest honor, reminding him that he is good enough. He can do this writing thing. Lilt of the Lark is his first professional sale, tells the story of a hapless musician who has the power to sway the minds of others through song. Droll, witty, and devilishly handsome, drawing parallels between character and author is permissible. Michael currently lives in Stockholm, Sweden, where he's joining us from this evening, with his partner, Jonna, and their 1-year-old baby cub, Ivar. He is hard at work on his full-length fantasy novel that he hopes will hit bookshelves before his hair goes gray. I'll hand it over to Michael to read an excerpt from his story, Lilt of the Lark.
Good evening, everybody. It's good morning for myself. It's 3:45 in the morning here, so you have to excuse me if my voice sounds tired. It's because I am tired, for lack of a better word. Lazarus, good job. But as was pointed out, I'm actually British, not Australian. So for what it's worth, I give you the nod of approval. But it's not worth a lot. Anyway, here's the beginning to Lilt of a Lark. Life was a costly commodity this far north, and the only thing Malk was rich in was poor decisions. Fortune dictated that he didn't have to choose his bridge. 11 of them fed into Cathgol, crudely carved and meagerly maintained, all treacherous in their own way on a night like tonight. Malk took the mountain bridge because he'd taken the mountain road. That it was the most treacherous of them all was a nuance entirely out of his freezing cold hands. It felt better that way, safer somehow. Back in Heartland, his bunkmates had sung of the wind in the upper helm cutting like the voice of a demon. Sulking with a cup of spiced wine in his hand, he dismissed the songs along with the hoary hags and the soul-stealing glaciers. Preeminent diligence as ever, Malky, he uttered through clenched teeth. He'd still sneer at frosted biddies and icy holes in the ground, sure enough, but he found it mighty hard to now dismiss something that left his woolen cloak feeling like fine silk. He pulled that cloak tighter about his face and did his best to slump straight in the saddle. An inch too far left or too far right, and he'd fall, and keep falling. A craggy silhouette of dark spires, Cathgol, capital of the upper helm, welcomed him like a nest of steel claws. 2 sentries manned a portcullis at the bridge's end, bowls of burning oil at their flanks. Laden in pelts, they had as well been bears. The Malk had never seen a bear wielding a poleaxe before. Ho, came the cry. Who approaches Cathgol? Malk jerked stiffly up on his reins as he entered the torchlight. Snow swirls dancing their dance to either side, drifting ever downward into the chasm below. A wary wanderer, wanting warmth. The bigger of the 2 guardsmen stepped cautiously out onto the bridge. What be you doing here after dark, wanderer? Well, wandering. Malk shook himself rid of the snowy mantle that had settled during the final hour of his journey, a parting boon from higher beings that were surely laughing at him. That, and sliding towards a shivering sleep from which I will never stir, comprehensively more of the latter at this point. The guard's face tightened into a scowl. I meant, what be your business? In response, Malk struggled off his gloves, reached down to his saddlebag, and came up holding an instrument of polished black wood. 3 feet from tip to base, its neck was a long and slender thing embellished by 3 golden strings. Its head was carved in the likeness of a songbird. This is my business. The guard snickered to his mate, half amusement, half relief. Just a sleeting bard, a young one and all, must be here for the Count's celebrations. Malk plucked the leftmost string of his instrument with fingers clumsy from the cold. He winced at the strangled sound it made. How they expect me to play in such barbaric climes, I will never chirp in no. You took the mountain road alone, boy? The smaller sentry asked. Alone? Yes, Malk replied absently, entirely focused on twisting the silver screws along the instrument's neck. Except for Hannah, of course. Hannah? My horse. You took the mountain road alone on that sway-backed old sow? Are you gritted? Am I what? Mad, the bigger guardsman clarified. Malk tweaked the highest screw and tried the second string. There was still something dreadfully off. Mad? No, just exceedingly unprosperous. He plucked the 3rd string and shivered at the twang that rippled forth. Too tight by half. Where be you coming from? The smaller sentry asked. Heartland. Heartland? Malk returned to the 1st string and plucked again. Aha! Progress. The wind wailed across the bridge and the bigger guard shivered. Only rogues and raiders and robbers on the mountain road these days. Malk smiled as he fiddled with another screw. Quite right. I met some of them. They wanted Hannah. But you isn't raggled. I'm not what? Robbed and or dead. I'm not, no. I sang a song for them, and they changed their minds. It had been a close thing, in truth. Too close. I'll be writing the Avery a ballad when I return south. They'll all hear it. Talon Wistron, Talon Benekbar, the High Eagle himself, want to make their chirping ears bleed. Malk tweaked the final screw, held his breath, and ran his fingers across the strings. There. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, wary and wanting warmth. He looked up from his busying. You ain't welcome in Cathgol, the bigger sentry announced, eyes hardened by suspicion. These is perilous times, and we got no want for comely singers and their fancy harps. City's full of them just now. Malk feigned hurt. But you haven't heard me play it yet. And it's not a harp, it's a cantatina. You enjoyed that? That was the first couple of pages.
Thank you. That was Michael Panter with an excerpt from Lilt of the Lark. Next up, we're going to have M. Elizabeth Ticknor. M. Elizabeth Ticknor is a gender-fluid writer and artist who shares a comfortable hobbit hole in Southeast Michigan with her Wookiee husband and their twin baby dragons. An avid reader of science fiction and fantasy, Elizabeth also enjoys well-written horror. The authors who have inspired her include Douglas Adams, Ray Bradbury, Orson Scott Card, Neil Gaiman, C.S. Lewis, Chuck Wendig, and David Wong. Her other interests include drawing, painting, and tabletop role-playing. Elizabeth is a winner of the Baen Fantasy Adventure Award. Her short fiction also appears in Fireside Magazine and an assortment of anthologies by Flame Tree Press, Air and Nothingness Press, and Wordfire Press. Elizabeth introduces her story with this. The first story seeds for the Phantom Carnival took root almost 2 decades ago when she read Riding the Rails, Teenagers on the Move During the Great Depression by Errol Lincoln Hughes. The thought of train hopping teenage hobos stuck with her for years. She originally wanted to write a historical romance in the vein of the 1992 film Far and Away, but she couldn't seem to get it down on paper every time she tried. She felt like the story was missing something. In the end, she replaced the romance with a platonic friendship and added a speculative element, which caught her interest far more thoroughly. Once she determined what Allison and Dog-Faced Dan were running from, the rest of the story fell into short order. I'm going to hand it over to Elizabeth to read an excerpt from The Phantom Carnival.
Thank you. Just general reference, if you hear random screams in the background, my husband is putting the kids to bed. Moonlight bounces off the tracks of the St. Louis rail yard, refracts off train engines, and dances over the puddled remnants of the day's rain. I avoid the light as best I can, creeping from shadow to shadow, and hug my newsboy cap tight against my skull. Work's dried up in town, so it's time to catch out for someplace new. I hate riding the rails. In town, I can safely be myself. Alice, the freckle-faced little girl with short, shorn caramel curls. Out here, I have to pretend to be somebody else. Al, the dirt-smudged boy, perpetually in need of a haircut. Dog-faced Dan slinks alongside me. He doesn't need to work at hiding like I do. His lithe form is practically one with the darkness. Most people would find the sight of Danny's long, stretched face and wolf-like teeth unsettling, but to me, they're oddly comforting. He's the one who hauled me into a boxcar my first night out, who taught me how to protect myself, who glamored my eyes so I could see the truths most people are blind to. I owe him everything I have, which is my life mostly, but isn't that the most important thing anyone has when you get down to brass tacks? Danny taps my shoulder with a claw-tipped hand and points to a train crawling out of the station halfway across the yard. That's our freight, Alice. Race you. He dashes ahead before I can argue. I weave through the yard, trying to stay hidden. I don't mind if Danny beats me. The magic pumping through his veins leaves him faster than me on my best days, but I can't afford to miss that train if he catches it. Dangerous for anyone to ride the rails alone at night, let alone a 16-year-old girl. I can pass for masculine when I have to, but I'm always better at it when I'm playing off Danny's manic energy. A barrel-chested man in a suit steps out from between a pair of trains, the space between them pooled with shadow. Has to be a rail yard bull. He's dressed too fancy for a hobo. He bolts toward me, arms and legs pumping like well-oiled pistons. I give up hiding and dash for the train, coat flapping in the wind. The local bulls are notorious for brutalizing anyone they catch riding the rails without a ticket, no matter their gender. The bull's true nature becomes clear when he dashes into the moonlight. His square jaw, handlebar mustache, and well-muscled body are nothing but a glamour to hide bark-like skin and knotted wooden limbs. I'd figure him for a lot louse like Danny if it weren't for his milky white eyes and slack-jawed expression. He's a carny. Every carny has those same dead eyes. Terror curdles my stomach. Bad enough to be caught by a rail yard bull, getting dragged off to the Phantom Carnival is a one-way ticket to trouble. Danny says that the grifters, the monsters that run the carnival, kidnap people and eat their memories like candy. The train picks up speed as I rush toward it. I take a deep breath and leap for the ladder on the back of the caboose. The ladder glows blue, must be made of iron. Danny didn't like that, I'll bet, and the railroad bull won't either. I catch a rung and pull myself up. It doesn't burn me like it would a lot louse or carny. If Danny hadn't taught me about the carnival, I'd be a scrub like anyone else. The carny grabs my left leg, his hand tight as a vice, and pulls me back down toward the tracks. Panic lances through my stomach and I scramble to hang on. Danny jumps off the roof of the caboose, lips curled in a canid snarl. Let go, you stupid bogey. He tackles the carny and sinks a too-wide mouthful of teeth into the big lug's right shoulder. The carny roars with pain. His grip loosens. I take advantage of the distraction and lash out with my right foot. My heel batters the carny's jaw, then slams full force into his eye socket. He lets out an agonized bellow and crumples onto swiftly receding train tracks, clutching at his ruined eye. I clamber onto the roof and swivel around in a panic. Danny! Danny vaults off the carny's back and dashes after the train with an energy I could never replicate. He scrambles up the ladder, palms sizzling from the iron's touch, and tumbles onto the roof beside me. His chest heaves with peals of laughter. I shudder and stare at the tracks. We're moving fast enough now that they rush behind the train like a river. That was too close. Are you joshing me? That was great. I almost got taken. Danny's laughter tapers off to a chuckle. He rolls to his feet. Don't worry. I wouldn't have let him get you. Even if he managed to haul you off to the carnival, I'd hunt you down before they fleeced you. Before they stole my memories. I narrow my eyes, my nose. I narrow my eyes and wrinkle my nose. What makes you so sure you could? Oh, there's the kids. Sorry. We'll just call it there, and you can, we'll just call it there because the kids say they need mommy time.
An author must wear many hats. Thank you. That was M. Elizabeth Ticknor with an excerpt from The Phantom Carnival. Next up, we have grand prize winner Desond Astaire. Desond Astaire is a speculative fiction storyteller from Central Illinois, where he navigates the journey of life alongside a devoted wife and forever loved son. In his other life, Astaire is a senior enlisted leader for a military public relations unit, supervising the training, development, and operations of multimedia content creators. Astaire's lifelong obsession with science and fiction and fantasy was forged as a child in the halls of local public libraries. The addiction was enabled by reading programs like Accelerated Reader and Book It, and the revelation to write professionally was born after his discovery of Dean Wesley Smith's Star Trek Strange New Worlds anthology. For these formative experiences, he is forever grateful. Astaire can be found Saturday mornings in Peoria metro area coffee shops, conducting weekly writing sessions and trying to apply Denzel Washington's adage that dreams without goals are just dreams, and they ultimately fuel disappointment. Writers of the Future was Astaire's goal since 2017, and Gallows is his first ever fiction publication. About Gallows, Astaire says, the story is about predestination and retribution colliding with when a bartender must determine if his customer is the time-traveling tourist an FBI sting is looking for. It was a writing exercise inspired by a Reddit writing prompt. But what made this one especially enjoyable was developing the protagonist's personal vendetta of taking back control of our future by any means necessary. I'm going to hand it over to Desond to read an excerpt from his grand prize winning story, Gallows.
Good evening and thank you. All right, this is Gallows. Cohenstead is a little nowheresville where High Pass Road meets Long Tom River in western Oregon. We've only got the Oppenheimer National Energy Laboratory and some basic village necessities, including the dive bar where I bartend. My customers will call me Gallows, and I am a discerning bartender. Everyone's got a story to hide, and I enjoy stealing it out of them. March 21st, 2020. It's unusually busy for a Monday night, and it makes my heartbeat race. I inhale deep through my nose and blow out through my mouth, and the calming tinge of the nearby pine tree farm fills my lungs like a good menthol cigarette. Steady, I keep reminding myself. Leverage the facts. That's what worked in the corporate world in that other life, which they murdered. Stay on point. There's Pinball, a scruffy hoss in plaid who's collecting beer bottles and clinking the paddles of the vintage pinball machine. Ponytail is sitting stoic and fidgeting with her Tortuga cocktail in a high-top table where she can see the whole room. Newsy Cap is an old-timer who drifts over from Junction City now and then to drink cheap beer and keep the slot machine running. Serious Guy, in his serious suit, just wanted a black coffee while he worked on his fancy tablet at a booth. Lily is a spunky woman with a tender smile who elected for a seat and some conversation at the bar. This is significant because I suspect some of them, or none, may be time-traveling tourists from the future. I have to find out who before they step foot outside the building. It has to be tonight because tomorrow the Oppenheimer lab will be discovering fusion energy and my window will expire. The FBI is counting on me to deliver bodies. Yes, I'm on medication, but not for what you think. I'm not delusional, arguably unstable and certainly obsessed, but not delusional, and I'll prove it. Lily orders a frosty pint of beer and talks me into ringing up an off-menu fried food sampler. I can't place her accent. It's almost familiar, but not. Interesting, but unsettling. It makes my stomach sour. Where are you from, Lily? I ask. Canada originally, she says, in no Maple Leaf accent I've ever heard. Oh yeah? A long way from home, huh? You could say that. Maybe a century or two, I think. I always intended my interrogations to start with the crucial question, point blank and in a tone just coarse enough to disarm a deceiver. So, what brings you to Cohenstead? Oh, you know, just passing through, Lily says bashfully. Liars, they're all liars. She's not accustomed to deception. They never are for some reason. Lily is especially sweet and flimsy. I know I can lean harder. Come on now, Lily, I say. I've been doing this a long time. I can smell a good story. What are you really doing here? I used to take the nonstop flight from Newark to Buffalo a handful of times a month on business, enough to have the routine down. But flight 8128 on February 12th, 2018 was delayed by 2 hours, so I ended up spending a lot more time than normal in Terminal C that night. It wasn't difficult to overhear conversations at the airport. Sometimes my coworker and I would do ridiculous voiceovers of strangers' conversations to pass the time. But he had slipped away to the restroom, so I just eavesdropped. Across from me were two starry-eyed college academics interviewing a woman of apparent celebrity about human rights. She had their full attention until the airline called first boarding. The silver-haired VIP exchanged parting pleasantries and stood to leave, and that's when Tweedledee and Tweedledum saw me. One reacted, pretending like we just hadn't made eye contact, and whispered to the other. The other took a glance at me before they began conspicuously bickering under their breath. Problem? I finally asked. No, sir, no problem at all, Dee said, backpedaling hard. Dum disagreed with his companion. Does the name Gallows mean anything to you? Dee slapped Dum hard across the chest. No, I said, my name is David Insman. I'm sorry, do I know you? Dee and Dum continued debating in private. Now they had my full attention, and their trepidation caused carelessness in the volume of their voices. If it's him, let's just get him on the plane. Problem solved, Dee said. No, we have to take him back to us and remove him from the equation, Dum argued. There were no survivors on 8128. Exactly, so he wasn't on the plane. Or taking him off the plane is the reason he lives, because he's supposed to die. I'm not even sure it's him. This is completely unauthorized. We're historians, not spec ops. But it's goddamn Gallows, Dum insisted. It was an understatement to say the pair made me uneasy, so I slipped away to the boarding counter and signaled the gate agent. Hey, I don't mean to cause alarm, but those two are acting very suspicious. I think you should probably call security, I said. I handed the gate agent my ticket for the final check-in, and she scanned it. That won't be necessary. Dumb appeared out of nowhere and flashed a badge. I'd been in enough airports to recognize that it wasn't a TSA credential. Mr. Ensman, can you come with me for a moment? My flight's boarding, I said. What's this about? Just come with us, please. Absolutely not, I said, turning my attention to the airline employee. I do not know these people. Please call security. Dumb grabbed me by the arm and I clocked him with a right hook. D lunged for me, but the actual TSA and some county deputies had us all detained by the time we were good and fighting. They left me handcuffed in a holding room, and I didn't see another person until about 2 hours when a Federal Bureau of Investigation agent with stone eyes and long hair under a baseball cap introduced herself to me. And where are you from? Special Agent Berkey asked. Red Bank. What time, Chief? I don't know. The officers took away my cell phone, I said. What time are you from? Eastern Daylight Time? I don't understand. Berkey took the seat across from me to stare me down. Your friends in the other room are singing like it's Sunday morning, she said. And I don't even think it counts as an interrogation, really. We just caught the third one trying to break you all out, the mercenary-looking guy. He's dead, so the other two are telling us everything in exchange for a bargain. Things like your nom de guerre gallows, and your headhunter work. Headhunter? I have never seen those two in my life. I don't know anything about a mercenary, and I've never heard that name before, I protested. My name is David Ensman. I'm a corporate compliance officer, a nobody. I'm supposed to fly to Buffalo on a routine business trip, which I've now missed because of those two jerks. Call my employer, ask him. You know what, better yet, call a lawyer, please, now. Dead men don't have lawyers, Mr. Ensman, Berkey informed me. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Flight 8128 crashed at 10:08 tonight, so everyone on board was killed, and you were checked in on the flight, so technically. I was not often speechless. It was a disadvantage in my line of work, but hearing that I should have died that night hijacked every remaining snarky word from my mouth. And that was the least thing stolen from me. My partner was on that flight, I said. Hot fire seeped from my eyes and attempts to choke it back only collapsed damn with sobs. His name was Adam. Can you check on his name too, please? Adam Eckert, please check. Berkey let me go on bawling, arguing with the inevitable for who knows how long, watching and observing. I'm so sorry, she eventually said, her chiseled eyes yielding some genuine compassion. You really have no idea what's going on here, do you? I imagine my face looked like a child asked to recite memorization on the spot in front of the entire class, and I had no answer to give. Nothing even remotely began to add up. They said we need to take him back with us, I choked out, my mouth dirt on sandpaper. I slammed my handcuffed fist into the steel table. Take him out of the equation. What does that mean? Why me? I don't think you'd believe me if I told you, because I'm not even sure that I do, Berkey said. Either way, we're going to place you in protective custody. They're going to kill me? I asked. They say they were going to abduct you to the year 2147.
Thank you. That was Desond Astaire with an excerpt from the award-winning story, Gallows. And now in this portion of the event, I want to ask each of you a specific question about your stories and then move into some more general questions that I have for all of you. If you haven't picked up Writers of the Future, Volume 38, it is jam-packed with great stuff, including the stories that you just heard. This first question is going to be for Lazarus. Lazarus, your story, Psychic Poker, takes place around a group of psychics, and you play with the idea that people not being able to hide the truth from one another. While this is an absolutely wonderful device for fiction, and I'm asking this because I know you must have thought about this in the creation of the story, what do you think the result would be in real life from this sort of scenario?
Honestly, I think a stalemate. That's kind of what I think, that when you have people who are trying to figure each other out, if they're trying to come to a communal resolution, they understand each other, and then they'll probably reach it faster, depending on their motivations. If they're put into a competition, though, it really, well, as I think I illustrated in my story, it devolves pretty quickly. pretty dramatically.
And did you face any difficulties when coming up with this story concerning the plot, about the various issues that would arise between these characters and their different motivations?
I wouldn't say it was difficult. I will say that I had a lot of fun coming up with the characters. I needed to make sure that the main character, being a psychic, would know intimately everyone that he was with. So I couldn't just, haphazardly throw people at the table with him. I had to come up with characters that would each have their own arc that would make sense. Every one of them is transformed by the experience in the most dramatic way I could possibly come up with. So I had to come up with, I almost mapped out exactly, how far away each person's personality and character and motivation was going to be from each other. I couldn't have them be too similar. That's too easy. That I needed to have a gambler, because the main character is not a gambler. But okay, just one gambler, but they couldn't, what are going to be the other people? And then it had to have just the right number of people to make a poker table make sense. It can't just have 2 people or 3 people or 4. It had to have, feel like a real tournament with lots of things going around. And because the way poker is played, where the cards are, or the bidding and the betting goes from one person to the next around the table, I was able to play with the circular or spiral effect that has as describing each character's action in turn. That was fun.
Thank you, Lazarus. It amounted in a very entertaining story as well. This next question is for Michael. Your story focuses on music as a form of magic. I'm curious, what inspired this, and how do you find fantasy to be a good medium for addressing the human love of music?
Okay, so the idea actually first came when I can't remember what it was I was watching. I was watching a series, I think, and there was a sort of scene played out where someone, a guy was playing the piano, and if I remember rightly, a woman said something like, "Oh, that really moved me." Sort of that, that almost made me want to. I can't fill in the blank. I can't remember what she said, but it was like it almost made me want to do this. And then it just sort of had the sudden thought, like, what if music could literally make you do things? And then I took that and sort of started to place some limitations on the magic system, and having to get a little bit clever with it, and being, okay, well, music can control people to a degree, but it has to sort of, the lyrics have to be unique to them, and they have to also match what you're trying to tell them to do. And then it just sort of spiraled from there. And like I say, in the beginning, it was a simple idea of what would happen if music could quite literally influence people to do things. And this sort of semi-formed world then a couple of hours later had already come to fruition, or was down on paper, in the sort of initial bits of world building. And what was the second part of the question, sorry?
And how do you find fantasy to be a good medium for addressing the human love of music?
Okay, so I think fantasy, I mean, music specifically, when it comes to sort of bards and things, which obviously, the main character in my book is a bard of sorts. Fantasy has always had a home has always been a home, sorry, for songs and pieces of music that specifically when written down I feel like they really draw you into the world. Obviously, they used, in almost every great fantasy book, there are lyrics, there are songs, and they do a very, very good job of drawing you into the world. because music has been a part of humans since humans have been humans, I guess. Don't quote me on that, but I'll take a random guess and say that it's been around for a long time. So, right, so it's something that everybody can connect to, everybody can relate to. So it's important to have, and especially so if you're building a living, breathing world. It's very, very important.
Thank you, Michael. This next question is for Liz. Your story, The Phantom Carnival, deals with outsiders and outcasts of society, homelessness and what it takes to survive on the streets, and how this relates to identity. What elements of our culture made you want to take on these themes in a speculative setting?
Well, those elements have always interested me just as a person. And I feel like when you're writing stories, characters that see things from the outside in some way, like characters who have a different experience than the norm, really help to give you a better perspective on what those norms are and what happens when they get taken away. Like, I have a friend who's experienced homelessness, and I talked with him about some of that when I was working on the story, because it's just, I wanted to make sure I portrayed it properly. And it can really just be as simple as one thing goes wrong at the wrong time, and then you don't have a whole house anymore. And we were kind of going through our own depression for a while, and I didn't get the same way as it did then as far as my personal experiences go. But I felt like in the 2000s, we had kind of a similar problem with jobs and things. So that's just that was when I started working. So it's kind of always been on my mind. And so things like that tend to creep in my fantasy just because it's part of my own lived experience. I've had some struggles with financial things over the years, so it just kind of resonates with me more, if that makes sense, because not all fantasy stories don't always deal with that kind of thing, and it seems like an important side of things to represent.
And as someone who's hopped trains myself, elements of this story resonated with me, such as your use of the bulls and their brutality. How did you go about researching that? Because it's not something everybody knows about.
The book that I mentioned in the bio for the story, it actually goes into a huge amount of detail. They interviewed something like 20 to 40 people to get the things for that book, and they had a lot of personal accounts. It's a massive tome of just different people's perspectives from how they lived it. And I didn't take any one person's story from it or anything, because that would be cheating. But I made sure to take elements from it and then make what made sense true to those characters. And honestly, the Great Depression, when I was doing college history stuff, the Great Depression was one of those things that kind of caught my attention just because it was so hard for so many people. And the fact that teenagers had to do that kind of thing just to survive really caught my attention. And that was one of the things that started me reading about it in the first place. So.
Thank you, Liz. This next question is for Desmond. I'm such a sucker for time travel stories, so I'm always happy to find a time travel story in an anthology. And your story obviously is a time travel tale. I wonder if you bumped into any paradoxical challenges that made the writing of this story difficult. And do you often take on the theme of time travel? Because I know a lot of speculative fiction writers avoid it because of the challenges that come along with dealing with multiple timelines and just the amount of paradox.
Oh yeah, so that is a huge thing, and a lot of producers, directors, and writers will sometimes just kind of whiff over it and throw some splash bang effects in there and hope that the audience doesn't catch on. And often, like Back to the Future is a great example of most audiences don't catch on to any of the paradoxes that happen or the different versions of time travel that they use. I personally like to use, I didn't use it for this story, but I like a theory of overlapping time travel that does not involve, oh, what's the word? Like continuity. So say that what happens in the past happens, and it does not create a separate timeline. It just overlaps into the future without creating a paradox. So and someday I'm really going to use that convention and have a lot of fun with it. But for this one, I completely used a grandfather self-fulfilling prophecy paradox, to where the time travelers that you see in the airport accidentally cause Gallows, who becomes this headhunter. So they actually create the problem that they're trying to avoid. So for this contained story, we didn't really end up running into any paradoxes. There is an expanded story that may or may not jump into. I know I've had a lot of my colleagues and a lot of readers say, well, where's the rest of it? I'm like, well, there is some more, but there's some other projects that I want to work on first. And so if I expand the Gallows story, it'll definitely get a little bit more complex as far as the causality. That's the word I was looking for, the causality and the paradoxes. And I'm sorry, what was the second part of the question?
I think you sort of answered it, but do you often take on the theme of time travel, since I know a lot of folks want to avoid the challenges that come up dealing with paradox?
I'm a time travel junkie. I can't, most of my stuff, I can't avoid it. It seems, even when I'm writing something that's not, it might not even be sci-fi themed, it may be something that's more fantasy themed, I always tend to lean a little bit into some sort of time element. And I think that's because I got introduced early on as a child to, to the Back to the Future, to the City on the Edge of Forever, those classic stories like that are part of Americana. And I think it just got ingrained into me. So I'm a time travel junkie too.
You and me both, Desmond. Thank you. The next couple of questions are for all of you. So we'll have you answer in the same order. I'll call each of you out as I read them. But I'm curious, for each of you, how many times did you enter the contest before winning? And what do you have to say to other up-and-coming writers about the importance of persistence? Let's start with Lazarus on this one.
I entered, I think, 10 times before winning. My first couple times were, didn't get anywhere. And then I think my fourth time, I got my first honorable mention. And then I got 4 more honorable mentions. And I expected this story to maybe do a little bit better. I didn't expect to be one of the winners at all. As far as persistent goes, so I teach art, and that's a creative career. And the one thing that we cannot teach students, we can teach them the craft, we can't teach them the drive to actually sit down and do the work. So it's one of those, is persistence important? It's mandatory, but not everyone can do it. And sometimes it's situational, sometimes it's personal, but it is the only path forward.
Thank you. And Michael?
Yeah, so I entered 3 times, I believe. The first time I entered, I was a finalist without properly understanding the sort of scale and grandeur of the contest. So I entered it, realized I was a finalist, and then it kind of dawned on me what an incredible opportunity this was, and all of the extra things that came with it. And that dawned on me just in time to be told that I hadn't I hadn't won. So yeah, then I entered again and got an honorable mention. And then my winning story was actually supposed to be submitted in the first quarter of volume 38. So just before Christmas, I believe it was meant to be in. In the end, I actually submitted it on the last day of the last quarter because life got in the way. But it was worth the wait, obviously, because it was the winning story. But yeah, so 3 times in total. And as for persistence, similar to what Lazarus said, it is very much compulsory if you ever want to get anywhere with writing. But I think for 2 reasons it's especially important. One, for just sheer improving your craft. It doesn't matter sort of how successful you are or how many things you've done, you can always get better. And I firmly believe that if you write 11 books, your 11th book is going to be, by a distance better than your first one was, particularly in the beginning anyway. And then also, I'm also a firm believer in the idea that you create a lot of your own luck. And because you send something out to something to someone one day and it gets rejected, the next day you could send it to someone else and they absolutely love it. And you would have never known if you gave up after the first try, right? And I think very much in this industry, success is a combination of very, very hard work and a degree of luck in your story ended up in front of the right pair of eyes at the right moment of the day at the right time. So yeah, as again, echoing Lazarus, it is mandatory.
And Elizabeth?
I entered the contest 19 times. I actually had my 20th and 21st entry in when I got the call, so I had to pull those out. My first time I got a rejection. I was disappointed. My second time I got a semifinalist, and that was exciting. And then it just it was a bit of a roller coaster ride. I didn't have like a clear trajectory. I had a series of semifinalists, and then I think I got a flat rejection. No, I got my finalist and my first finalist. I've had 3 finalists. It's all over the place. It's just scattershot. But I think persistence is really important, because every time I was about to stop and move on to other things, that was when I got a finalist. So like I would continue to work toward the other things I wanted to do. Like I want to write novels eventually, but I had kids, so that I'm doing the short story thing for a little while longer. But I feel like the kids actually gave me more of a drive for persistence, because I want to be able to give them a better life. And I feel like if I can earn money writing, that'll help my husband. And I like writing more than I like any other type of job I've ever had. And that I think is part of the persistence for me, is finding something you have that fire about and pursuing that, whether it's writing or art or anything, is very important. So it's definitely important in writing, but if you don't have that drive for writing and you have it for something else, do that. That said, I definitely have it for writing, and I feel like it's really important, especially like sometimes you might end up on hold for a while. Like when I was about 20, I actually wrote my first short story in a class that was an original story instead of a random fan fiction. And then I submitted it to Intergalactic Medicine Show at the recommendation of my creative writing teacher, and I got a rejection. And then I just didn't do anything for like 10 years. Don't do that. Don't do that. That was, I made the mistake, and then I learned from it eventually, and I was like, no, I'm going to go back and I'm going to actually do the writing now. But if you can skip the 10-year gap, that's probably better for you. But yeah, persistence is important.
Sound advice. And Desmond?
I believe I submitted 4 stories about 6 times or so over the course of between around 2017 and at December of 2021. Mike and I were in the same quarter, and yeah, man. So I'm going to try to keep my answer real short, because Galaxy Press, we just put out a blog post where I really encapsulated what I really think is success is a decision that we have to make. It makes the difference between someone who says, I want to be an artist, I want to be a producer, I want to be a writer, and the people who are on the screen right now who actually do it. And what I boiled it down to for myself was to keep learning how to do this thing better, and never ever once thinking that I know how to do this, because thank you, Jason. Never thinking that I actually know how to do this, because that's when if I think I know how to do this, then I failed, because you can't learn, you can't become a know-it-all in an art form. Another thing was, setting goals. I've been writing since I was like 13 years old. And that was like, that was a lot more years than it took for me to get into Writers of the Future. The difference was I set a goal, discovered Writers of the Future, and said, okay, I'm going to write for this until I get there. That was the difference, setting objectives. And then the third one I find to be so important, because if you think about it, if you look up the statistics, the rejection rate in writing is like 98 to 99%. If you are a writer, you will be rejected, and you will be rejected more than you are accepted. That is a fact of this profession. We can't let it get us down. We see so much in our community where, people get, very depressed and sad, and they let it slow down their process of what they're trying to do. We have to kind of guard ourselves from internalizing the losses and focus on the wins. And I think that kind of, I practice something called, radical acceptance, where, I get a rejection letter, usually a couple a week, and I say, oh, there's a rejection. Okay. And then, it happened. Now that just signals me, all right, now it's time to submit that somewhere else. And I'm going to keep doing that until that piece lands somewhere else. And that keeps me from getting slowed down. What's his face? Read the article. There's a motivational speaker who puts a really good spin on that. How to find a silver, training your mind to find a silver lining in the losses. And I think if we do those three things, that enables us to persevere and not quit, because it's so easy to quit in the creative fields. But to succeed in this field, it really is a decision that you can make. It's not a roll of the dice. It's how you train yourself to be. Jocko Wilnick, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Very inspiring. Another question for all of you, and we'll start with Desmond and work our way back on this one. After winning, how did this change your perception of your craft, and how has it affected how you approach writing since the win?
Well, the dream came true. It's not this magical thing out in the distance that might happen someday. It's now happened. So that's been a lot of fuel to fire and a lot of motivation, especially after getting, to go to Los Angeles and meet household names of sci-fi and fantasy through the Writers of the Future workshop. And they trained us how to go even more forward with this thing, which is a huge incentive to enter this contest. Yeah, I just feel like, okay, now we can only keep going forward. I mean, you can't go backwards now unless you quit.
And Elizabeth?
I had kind of, when I first started entering the contest, I'd kind of decided that I was racing myself, and that I would either win the contest or I'd pro out, which is when you sell 4 stories at pro rates to a professional market. And I got real close there. I got real close, but I feel like it's kind of really given me that confidence to say, yes, I can do the novel thing when I feel comfortable with it. Like I'm not pushing myself for that right now, because like I said, they're not in kindergarten yet. We got a couple years before I'm really going to have time to do a full-time writer thing, but I'm kind of poking at novel stuff, and I'm poking at short stories, and I feel the confidence that when I'm ready to try for full-time writing, that I will be there. Just I feel like a pro, and I had already started to feel that way because of how close I got. But this really just kind of cemented that for me, and it makes me happy.
Wonderful. How about you, Michael?
Well, I think there's a sort of been a shift in my brain when I consider that now I am a professionally published author, right? I'm sort of, you spend the initial years, at least, when you're decide to sort of crack down and become a writer and give it your best shot, you obviously spend your initial years seeking that, sort of a way of becoming professionally published and taking that first big step. And once that's achieved, and in an anthology such as this one, which is a sort of a bestseller, and it's a collection of so many wonderful stories and really an amalgamation of such incredible talent, that for me has almost, I mean, not motivated me, because I didn't ever suffer from a lack of motivation. It's just more sort of given me the momentum, I would say, to push on and really take the next step, which is, arguably even bigger than the one I've just taken, but you need to take a first step to be able to take the second one. And I would say, on a more linked directly to my craft, it also, in a sort of funny way, gave me the idea that I'm currently working on for a novel, which is a sort of expansion of the world and expansion of the character, and going and looking at the character's whole life, as opposed to just this sort of window into the world, which I gave you in Writers of the Future, volume 38. So yeah, it's impacted me in many wonderful ways.
And how about you, Lazarus?
I think it's a mistake for people to think of writing as a skill. It's like 20. And I came into sitting down and writing words on paper to tell stories late. I mean, yeah, I've dabbled and did it a bunch of times throughout my life, but I really didn't go sit down. It wasn't until I was 47, 48, where I just sat down and went, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to put them down. And I was scared. Writing things for friends and family, people say, oh yeah, this is great, and that's not really great. I didn't know what the actual rules were. I went to an art school and I learned how to do copywriting and advertising writing, which is completely different. And a little bit of screenplay, but I had never learned on how to make words elegant on a page that people would want to read paragraph after paragraph, page after page. And I wasn't certain how long it would take. There's an old writing adage that is, once you write 1 million words, you've probably gotten pretty good at doing it. It reminds me of that scene from the Knockaround Guys when Vin Diesel is talking about, once you've had 500 fights, you get to call yourself a tough guy. And so I kind of put that down as a measure. And I said, okay, over the years, I don't know how many I've actually written, but I'm going to see how far I can go. And in 1 year, I wrote 400,000 words. I actually counted, like 411,000. That was in 2020. And it definitely helped. But even then, I was telling stories and I felt confident about my stories, that the characters were good and the plot and ideas were good. But I really was not certain at all in whether I had successfully put words down that people wanted to read. The award told me that I did it, that I had reached a level in which people now want to read, and I had reached that level of craft, which is great. But there's no guarantee for success. Lots of people are good at writing. Now it's a matter of writing stuff that people want to read. That was my very first ever sale of a story. I've sold one since. That was to a professional magazine as our professional anthology. And that's great. I haven't sold another one yet, but I am finally getting the emails back from publishers saying, this was really well written. We don't want it at this time. Send us another story, which is, that's the motivation that really you have to seize on. That's the silver lining, you know, that there's rejection. You don't know what that rejection actually means. It could mean anything. The benefit of the award is you get to look back and say, all right, I'm probably putting the words down on paper correctly. It's probably just not their taste, their style. There's just something about it that they want something different, but somebody else will. And you just keep sending it to the next person, the next person, the next person. And for me, the confidence level that the award says that, you know, it's like being anointed, your level of, my level of skill has reached X, and now you can do it. And now you just have to do it. And that's what I'm doing. So.
Excellent. And one last question before we go, and we'll start with Lazarus and work our way back on this one. What are you currently working on, and what's coming up next for you?
I have a dozen short stories in circulation out to publishers, trying to, fishing for that next sale. I have a novel that I have about half edited all the way through. That sounds weird, but I wrote, going back to what I said before, I had written this novel 2-3 times, not certain if I knew exactly how to write a novel. After receiving the award, I say, okay, I actually know how to write a novel, and I've gone through and I've edited I have half of it fully to my satisfaction. Now I have to finish the next half. That one I look forward to pitching out to traditional publishers, and if I can't find someone who'll bite, then I'll publish indie. And I have a horror novel that is laid out, and I'm just trying to sink my teeth into that. So I'm actually not certain exactly which novel it's going to be. That's going to be the first one I want to release, but that's what I'm doing.
And Michael, what are you working on?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, I'm basically taking the world and the character that appears in volume 38 and almost giving it the Patrick Rothfuss treatment of taking a sort of, like I say, taking that window into the world and basically blowing it up and expanding it and writing a full-length novel with Malk as the main character. I would tentatively say I'm about a quarter of the way done. But yeah, so the aim is to publish traditionally and go down that route. I'm not much of a, despite the win, I'm not much of a short story writer. I haven't really ever dabbled in short fiction. I've kind of my dream. I mean, if I'm completely honest, up until about 2 years ago, I didn't even realize people sold short stories to anthologies and stuff. I was so disconnected from that part of the writing sort of world. So that's probably something I'll explore a little bit more moving forward. But my main focus has and is and will continue to be my novel.
And how about you, Elizabeth?
I just put out an anthology for the future finalists, which is kind of a group of people who at the time of joining had made finalists in Writer of the Future but had not won. And we kind of put together an anthology of stories. It's called Fourth and Starlight. It's 19 stories by 17 authors. Some of them are flash fiction, which is why we got a couple of extras in there. I like it a lot. It mixes sci-fi, fantasy, pretty much everywhere and everything in between. And so that's what I just did. I I've got a couple short stories that I've been working on editing. I've got several that are going out to markets, and we'll see how that goes. It's always kind of a cycle there. And then I said I'm not doing novels, but I'm sort of doing novels. I'm just not pushing myself to do novels, if that makes sense. I've got a rough draft that's about halfway complete for a weird Western type of story. And then after that, I want to write a novel about either my sentient golem type construct character. He's a pacifist, but he was built for war, and there's a lot of drama there, and it's a fun setting. Very, very kind of high fantasy. But then I also have this weird sci-fi thing that I want to write that's essentially Mad Max Fury Road meets Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I don't know how else to explain it. It's a lot of fun, and I'm trying to save it for later because I want to write the other things, but it's hard for me not to go for that kind of crazy because it's a lot of fun, and it started as a joke, and then it's not a joke. It's delightful in the weirdest ways. So that's me.
That sounds like a lot of fun. And Desmond, what's on the plate for you?
Oh, I've got a really, really fun one that I'm working on submitting to one of our colleagues that's putting together an anthology. Should have that wrapped up here this week. And then I'd like to spend the next year or two just completely oversaturating the professional short story market and just writing that out. And in the meantime, I'm one of those that if I don't really buckle down, then I just jump from idea to idea, which is really not how you publish novels. So I think I've got one idea for a novel that I really want to follow through on. Basically, it's how a neurodivergent child wild card disrupts a utopia in the far future, and yeah, so we'll see how that goes.
Well, thank you so much to Lazarus, Michael, Elizabeth, and Desmond. Congratulations on your win. If you have not picked up L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future Volume 38 yet, is another fantastic anthology, as they always are. There's a link in the chat for that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find the link in the info. Thank you so much to our readers. Thank you so much to our audience. A wonderful evening and a pleasure to meet all of you. Have a great night.